I take my iPad with me everywhere. If I've got a couple of minutes, I can draw, practice, even work on a client project when I'm away from home. By far, the best drawing and painting app available for the iPad is Procreate. Hi, I'm Brad, and in this course, you're going to learn everything you need to know to master the app Procreate.
Is this class about drawing?
Yes! We're going to learn drawing and painting techniques. I think the best way to learn how I learn is by doing, and the best way to learn Procreate is by drawing in Procreate.
Draw what?
Well, we're going to go over brushes, and we're going to go over a lot of basic drawing and painting techniques that anybody can do. We're going to learn about the selection tool by drawing comic strips, and we're going to talk about all the features that they packed into the layers by creating a painting with overlapping textures. All the examples that I use here are simple, they're easy to follow. Anybody can follow along and learn different drawing and painting techniques while learning this program. Whether you're just learning how to draw or you're someone who already loves drawing and wants to learn Procreate, this is a great place to start. You can draw with your finger. You can draw with a stylus. You can have a brand new iPad, or your iPad can be a couple years old. It doesn't matter. Plus, there's so much more here. We're going to be talking about the perspective grid. We're going to be talking about easily coloring and filling in solid objects. We're going to even be talking about how you can export your own speed draw videos from any painting you do in Procreate. So what are you waiting for?
I'm hungry.
Okay, can't help you there. Go to the kitchen, get a snack, then come back and we can start drawing. Hello and welcome to this course, which is all about drawing and painting on my favorite iPad app, Procreate. Before we get started, there's two things that you're going to need. The first thing you're going to need is an iPad, because that's what we're going to be drawing on. The second thing that you're going to need is the app Procreate. It's $10 and it's available in Apple's App Store. Now, the reason you need an iPad is because the iPad is the only place that can run Procreate. Right now, it's not available on any other platform. There are other art apps available for the iPad. For example, there's Medibang, there's Art Studio Pro, there's Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer. I could go on and on. The reason I'm sticking with Procreate, and the reason I really like Procreate, is as soon as you open it up, you can start drawing and painting in it. It's pretty obvious what you need to do, but there's a lot of power under the hood. And as soon as you start diving into all of the other tools available, you start to realize all the cool stuff you can do with it. One question I get over and over from many people who are getting ready to start this course is, do I need an Apple Pencil in order to do these lessons? And the short answer is no, you can paint with your finger, but I will say this. A lot of these lessons are going to be a lot easier to do if you have an Apple Pencil, mainly because the Apple Pencil is just more accurate. Your finger obscures where the line is. Sometimes it could be hard to close shapes and things like that. And those sorts of things are just easier to do with a stylus, especially stylus like the Apple Pencil. I also want to talk a little bit about how this course is set up. I learn by doing, which means I like to get my hands on something, I like a drawing assignment, and I like to actually go through it, and that's how I'm going to remember the tools. That's how this course is set up. So, for example, we learn about the layers by drawing a strawberry icon sort of thing. We learn about some of the shape tools and coloring and reference layers by going out and drawing a simple comic strip. So you don't need a lot of artistic experience to do these lessons, but they do kind of build on each other as we go. And some of the lessons where we do get more complex, like the final lesson, I will provide a sketch. So if you don't feel comfortable drawing what we're drawing, you can download that sketch and kind of work from there. This course has been redesigned entirely from the ground up for Procreate 5. This course has been around for almost 3 years now, and this is its third redesign revision where I've re-recorded most of the content. And so when you go through the course, you're going to notice that, but at the end of the course, there's a bunch of bonus content. You might wonder, where does that come from? And basically what's happened is over time, some of the older lessons that still have some value to them, and I didn't want to get rid of, but don't necessarily fit into the context of the current course as it's set up, I've just left in there as bonus lessons at the end. So after you finish the course, if you're like, hey, I want some more practice or I want to learn some more things, there are a couple bonus lessons at the end for folks who want to do that. And since you've purchased this course like everybody else who has over the last 3 years, if Procreate 6 comes out in a couple months, which I'm sure it will, I'll update the course and that content will be available to you for free. So I think that about covers the basics. So let's get drawing. So in this section, we're trying out a little bit of a different view. You get to see my plant, my little dinosaur prop here, as well as my iPad. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to be going... So in this section, we're trying out a little bit of a different view. So in this section, we're trying out a little bit of a different view. You get to see my plant, my little dinosaur prop. So in this section, we're trying out a little bit of a different view. You get to see my plant, my little dinosaur prop here, as well as my iPad. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to be going over some hand gestures and things like that. And I thought for these two early lessons, it's just going to be easier for you to see what I'm doing if you can actually see my hands. And then in the lessons after that, it's just going to be a screen so you can see exactly what's happening in the interface really crispy and really easily. So in the last section, we talked about the gallery and all the things we can do in the gallery. In this section, we have created a new document and we can start drawing. Now, you've probably already used Procreate a little bit on your own before this. Maybe you've used it a lot on your own before this, but it's pretty easy to use. You just take your pencil or your finger and you start drawing. Simple. But there are a bunch of tools in here and kind of tucked away. And so this one is an overview of the basic tools. And then each section going forward, we're going to be doing a deep dive into some of the tools and all the things we can do with them and then using them on a project by project basis. So first things first, we have our gallery button in the upper left-hand corner. So if we tap on that, it'll take us back to the gallery. And of course, if we tap on an image, it's going to take us back to the image. And then we have a bunch of tools, and there's so much tucked away in Procreate in these tools. We're going to be using this little wrench icon quite a bit. And inside it, there are these different tabs that we can go through that allow us to do everything from preferences to adding text to using grids and all sorts of different stuff. And this is where a lot of the power of Procreate is kind of tucked away. After that, we have our adjustments. So we can change the opacities of things. We could add blurs. So I'm going to slide this and blur out my text. Maybe just make it a little bit blurry. You get the idea. I'm going to reset that. But there's a lot of things and adjustments that we're going to be covering throughout the course as well. We've got a selection tool. It's going to do a lot of different things. I'll just freehand select this, and now that word hello is selected. And if we wanted to, we could then use the next tool, our arrow tool, to move around our element, which also comes in handy. Over here we have our brushes, which is basically what we're going to be using throughout the course. I'm going to say this a couple times. My iPad Pro I've had for a while. I've imported a lot of brushes. I'm going to have a lot of brushes that you don't have. Now I'm going to try to only use brushes in these lectures that come natively with Procreate, so you don't have to purchase anything extra here. But just so you know, if you see some brushes in my brush palette that you don't have, that's okay. That just means I've gotten them extra, and I'll make sure that I point those things out. And I'll also be talking about how to import and brushes and things like that in a later lesson. It's really easy to do. Then we have our smudge tool, which works a lot like our brush tool, where if we take our brush tool, we can lay down a line, while our smudge tool allows us to then smudge that brush or smudge those lines using a brush. So if we double tap on that, we can smudge with any texture or any brush that we can draw with. The eraser works in a similar way. We can tap on that, I can come in here, and I could start erasing. And the eraser, just like the brush and the smudge tool, allows you to erase with different textures as well. So I can erase with that stucco texture too. Then over here we have our layers. So if I open that up, right now I only have one layer. I can always add another layer, and then when I go over here, let me grab a pencil, maybe a different color, and I draw on top of that layer. If I decide, you know what, I didn't want that, I can always toggle off that layer. Really nice feature. If you're new to drawing programs, we're going to be doing a deep dive into that. If you've been around drawing programs forever, you're probably familiar with how layers work. There's a lot of stuff tucked into these layer settings. And then lastly is this little circle over here. These are our color swatches. This is where we're going to live and breathe. There are tabs on this as well, so we can change the way that our color works. We can add manual values. We can save palettes, things like that. So there's a whole section on how we're going to be using the color palette as well. Let's go over to this left-hand side of the screen over here. Let's go over here to this left-hand side of the screen over here. What we have is we have a slider which changes our brush size. Wait, can you see that? Our brush gets bigger. We're drawing with a big brush. I slide it down, brush gets smaller. I'm drawing with a smaller brush. Handy stuff. This is the opacity. So this is obviously full opacity. Let me shrink that up. And this is, a percentage of that. Next up, let's look over here on our left-hand side. We have two things. This first thing over here adjusts our brush size. So if I slide it up, I get a bigger brush. Oops, let me get it from an angle here so you can see it. If I slide it down, it's small, and it gives you a little preview of the size that you need. So really big brush. Really small brush. Let me move it up to the middle there. This is the opacity, and this affects different brushes differently. So if I move the opacity all the way down, what do we get? We get an opaque brush that you can kind of see through when you're drawing with it. And this little button in the middle is a modifier button. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit because there's a lot of hand gestures and things like that. So know that modifier is there, and that's going to come in handy when we take a look at some of the preferences and shortcuts. And then the last thing that's kind of worth knowing here is that there is a back button. So if you want to undo, there is a physical button that lets you do that. And underneath it, there's a redo button, so we can tap on that to redo what we just did. So in a nutshell, that's the interface. It's super simple. Anybody can create a canvas, grab a brush, and start drawing. But you can do so much more in Procreate, and that's really what this course is about, is diving into all of these little sections and finding all the cool tools and accessories that the makers of Procreate have hidden away. So, in the next section, I'm going to be talking about hand gestures, because that's another thing that makes it a lot of fun to draw in this program. And then, we're going to get on to drawing. We are ready to talk about layers. In the upper right hand corner, if you tap on the little layers icon, you're going to see all of that laid out before you. And over the course of the next exercise, we are ready to talk about layers. In the upper right hand corner, if you tap on the little layers icon, you're going to see all of that laid out before you. And over the course of the next exercise, we're going to be diving deep into all the different things we can do with layers and how we can use layers to stack them on top of each other to build out some more complex, maybe not complex, but some more intricate illustrations. One thing that I do a lot of is I tend to grab a pencil first, and I'll sketch out with a pencil, and then I'll lay down my colors on top of that. So I'm going to go over to my brushes, and I'm going to go to the sketching section, and I'm just going to grab a pencil. Doesn't really matter what pencil you use. I'm going to use this one called Peppermint, and I'm just going to go ahead and start drawing. And the thing I'm going to be drawing today is a strawberry. And what I want to do with these lessons is I want to make most of the things that I'm drawing pretty easy to follow along with and pretty easy for you to just say, oh, I can draw that. So I'm going to be using some pretty basic shapes and some basic ideas that really, hopefully, anybody can kind of come along with. So if you're drawing along and you want to pause at any time to work along, like if I'm moving a little too fast, just pause the lesson, catch up with me, finish drawing, and then keep watching as we go. So that's what we're going to do. So let's start by drawing the strawberry. I'm going to start with a circle here, and like anything, if I hold my pencil at the end of the circle, it's going to give me my shape, and then if I put one finger down on the canvas, it's going to snap to a perfect circle. So this is going to be the start of our strawberry. And when you think about a strawberry, it's not a perfect circle, but we can take this circle and kind of make a shape sort of like that. It doesn't have to be perfect or clean. I'm a really ugly sketcher, but it gives me a pretty good idea of what shape I want that strawberry to be. And I'm just going to kind of overlap it and kind of make it dark to give myself an idea of where that strawberry is. And then when I'm done getting the edge of that shape, I'm going to just take my eraser and I'm going to take out that middle line in that strawberry because I don't really need it anymore. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to think about the stem at the end of the strawberry. And the stem is just simply a line, right? There's just a line, but it's a little thicker than a line. So we'll add an end to it and we'll just kind of sketch in the end of that stem and where that strawberry goes. There are also going to be leaves. Now I could go through how this would work on a 3D angle and say, okay, the strawberry's round and we'll add our leaves that way. But I'm going to keep it simple today. We're going to keep this more iconic than realistic. And in order to do that, I'm just going to draw some triangles. Like I'll draw a triangle there, maybe come down here, draw another triangle like that, and then maybe draw a triangle on top, something like that. Draw a triangle this way, And this will give us the start of the top of our strawberry. Now I'm going to take my eraser after I've put in a couple of my triangles, and I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to erase some of those inside lines so we can see it. Okay, that's starting to work. And then I'll just round up the top of those leaves. So I like to find shapes and things, and since my work tends to be cartoony or more like icon type illustrations, oftentimes that really helps me understand when I can break things down into their basic shapes. And sometimes if a shape looks weird, like for example this left-hand side of that leaf, I might just take my pencil and say, oh, I'll just round that off a little bit more over there, and I can always take my eraser, come in, and erase that edge. And I think that really helps me. I want this leaf to kind of poke out a little more, so I'll add a little extra on that side, take my eraser and erase a little bit more. So you get the idea. This is how I'm going to draw the top on my strawberry. Cool, so now that that's in place, let's start using our layers to layer some paint on top of each other to bring the strawberry to life and give it a little bit of depth and make it kind of interesting. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new layer by opening my layers, hitting that plus button to create my layer. It's going to be called layer 2 by default. In fact, every time I add a layer, it's just going to add a number at the end of it. And as these illustrations get more complicated, something you might want to do to make it easier to read is to tap on your layer. Like here, I'm going to tap on layer 1, and I'm going to tap it again, and it brings up a bunch of options. And there's a lot of things we can do with this layer. I want to look at the very first thing, which is renaming it. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on that, and I'm going to call this pencils. And as you see, my keyboard came up, so it's really easy for me to go ahead and rename it. And I'm going to name layer 2. What do I name it? I'm going to name this base color, because that is the main thing that we're going to be using that layer for. While we're there, I'm going to tap on that layer again, and we can talk about some of the options we have here. For example, we have select, we have copy, we have fill. Let's try some of these out while we're there. I'm going to use the pencil layer actually for this. Obviously, select, what it does is it will select all the contents in that layer. So if I tap on select, you will see this little bit of an angled pattern. That means that there is a selection. Down below, there's the selection box. We're going to be talking about that later. But that is how you select all the contents on a layer. So say I grab my arrow tool, I would now be able to move those around. Anyway, more on that later. What else do we have here? We have copy. So if I just want to copy the contents on that layer and then paste it into another layer, I'll take 3-finger swipe down and I'll say paste, and it just pasted in a second version of that strawberry. I don't need that right now. So, and what it does is it pastes it as another layer. So I'll just swipe over and delete that layer. We can fill that layer, which will fill the entire layer with the color that you have currently selected. I can clear it, which will delete everything in the layer. And alpha lock, I'm going to talk about that in a minute because that's awesome. And then there's masks. There's a whole section on masks, or we can invert it, which will change all the colors and reverse them. So in this case, this dark gray colored / black colored lines will turn into white color lines. So if we actually invert that, you can see it in the preview that the strawberry is still there and it's white, but you can't see it on the canvas anymore because it matches the background. So I'm going to take 2 fingers, tap to undo. There we go. And then lastly, we have reference, which again, we're going to be learning about that later on. That is awesome. When we draw comics, you're going to see how cool it is to use a reference layer to color your comics. So fast, so easy. So on this base layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to color my strawberry. I'm going to create a big strawberry colored shape. So I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to grab a nice pinkish red color. And then on that base layer, I'm going to basically paint a large swath. So I'm going to grab an inking pen. So I go to inking, then I'm using the technical pen because it'll give me a nice clean line. And then I can just come in here on my base layer and trace my pencil sketch of my strawberry just like that. And I'm going to make sure that I close that in so there is no white space at all in this shape. And then I can tap and hold on the color and drag that color into my empty space inside that strawberry, and it's going to fill it in. If you're used to other painting applications, oftentimes there's a paint bucket icon which will do this. Well, that's how you do it in Procreate, is if you have a shape, you could just take your circle, you drag it down from the upper right-hand corner, and it fills in your shape. And I get to tap to undo that. Now, one thing that's happening is I want to be able to see my sketch, and my color blob here is covering that up. So I'm going to go back to my layers, and what I want to do is move my base color layer underneath my pencil layer, which I just noticed is called pencil is, which is weird, but I'm going to keep it for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap and hold on that base layer, and you see it just changed a little bit when you're holding on it, and that allows you to drag it. So I'll tap and hold, and it allows me to drag it in my layer order so I can put it above or below other layers. And when I let go, it goes below. And what you see now is that color layer is going to be beneath my pencils. So as I add more layers, I'm still going to be able to see what I'm drawing here. I'm still going to be able to see my sketch, basically. Now, one thing is I tend to sketch kind of heavy. It gets a little bit dark. I don't need it to be this dark. It's actually kind of distracting me a little bit because it's kind of hard to see the edge of my lines. So there are some layer properties that we can use to adjust that. In every layer, on the right-hand side, there's the ability to toggle that layer's visibility on and off, which is this little checkbox. So if I tap that checkbox, it turns the layer off. If I tap it again, it turns that layer on. And there's the letter N next to that. So let's check that out. If I tap on the letter N, it brings up a whole bunch of options. We're going to talk about some of these options in a little bit, but for now, just kind of know that they're there. The most important option for me right now is this opacity slider. Right now it's set to max, but as you see, I take it and with my finger I can slide it on down and I can make it transparent. So I can just barely see my sketch. I might want it a little darker than that. But this way the sketch won't get in my way. I'll be able to see my colors really vividly, but I'll still be able to see my sketch. And at various times during this illustration process, you're probably going to see me come in here and tap that checkbox to turn it off just to see how that illustration is coming along. So I'll tap that again, and now my sketch layer is on. So I'm going to tap on my base layer, and my next step is to add the green stuff on the top of this strawberry. So I'm going to hit the plus button so that I can put that leafy thing on its own layer. I'm going to tap on the name of the layer again. And of course, I'm going to go to rename so we can keep this all in order. And I'm going to rename this leafy stuff. There we go. Perfect spelling, Brad, as always. Now I can go to my colors and I can grab a nice shade of green. Probably want it to be a little darker than that. So now on this new layer, what are we going to do? Same thing we did before. We're just going to start tracing with our technical pen. I'm going to start drawing in these leaves. Just kind of drawing them in here. My lines are curving a little bit. They're not perfect triangles. That's okay. We get the idea. There we go. I'm going to get the stem in there just like that. Now that everything's closed, I could drag my color in there, let it go, and I have the start of a strawberry. Go to my layers, toggle off my pencil lines, and you can see this is starting to take shape.